If you've played piano for any length of time, then you understand that playing scales is an essential part of the whole process. And honestly, without them, we can't really develop at the piano like we want to. However, the big issue I see with scales is pianists not really knowing how to practice them or even really how to master them. So for that reason, I am super glad you found this video today because we're going to be discussing how to master scales at the piano. In this video, I'll cover a lot of things. I'll show you how to play scales, how to practice them the right way, get into the structure of them and describe what they are and how they work, and ultimately give you a practice plan that makes sure that you can develop every scale just the way you want so you can always play them beautifully, smoothly, and masterfully. By the way, this is Josh with Piano Frenzy, and if you're new to the channel, make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss a beat. You can catch all the latest updates. So before I get into how to practice scales, you really need to get a great understanding of what exactly they are. So by definition, scales are basically a sequence of musical notes that are arranged by pitch. Now, those pitches can go in ascending motion or they can go in descending motion. And there are all types of scales. There are major scales, there are minor scales, there are blues scales, there are diatonic scales, there are pentatonic scales. There's a huge variety of scales. However, for the purposes of this video, we're mostly going to focus on major and minor scales because as a beginner pianist, that's really what you're going to be encountering the most. So how do you know when a scale is major? Well, when you hear it, you feel pretty happy. Here's an example of what a major scale can sound like. So in our first example, we're going to play the C major scale. Now to me, the scale has a happy sound, but in order to hear it a little better, I'll add some chords in the left hand so you can see what I mean. So in general, the mood has a much happier feel. It's a warmer, richer sound. So as you can see, we set a bit of a happy mood when we played that major scale. Now we're going to try a minor scale, which is going to make us feel sad. Now more specifically, that is the C harmonic minor scale, which adds a bit of a sadder mood to everything. So I'll add some chords in the left hand so you can feel this mood change. So as you can see, it creates a bit of a darker mood. It changes how things feel, and the energy is just a lot more darker overall. So as you can see, it's very easy to change the mood of a scale from major to minor just by adjusting a pitch here or there. And that's actually a really powerful tool in music because it can really create a change in mood, and it can help an area become more important or add some contrast in other areas depending how you're trying to compose that piece. Now there are more scales beyond the key of C. For example, there can be D major and D minor, E flat major and E flat minor, and so forth. Now although there are several different types of scales out there, the fingering pattern is generally the same for most of them depending which mode you're in. For example, if I were playing D major, I would use the same finger pattern of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I were doing D minor, I would just simply use the same finger pattern because all I'm doing is changing one note. However, there are different types of scales that do have different finger patterns, such as D flat major, which starts with finger 2, or B flat major, which also starts with finger 2. And depending whether you're using your left hand or your right hand, you might even start with finger 3. For example, E flat major in the left hand. So now we're at the core part of the video, which is how exactly should you be practicing scales? What's the best way to get into them so that 1, you can get your fingering down, 2, you can feel confident, and 3, they always are masterfully played and beautiful and smooth every time you try them out. Well, unlike other people on YouTube, I'm not going to make you put your hands together at first. In fact, I'm not even going to make you use all your finger numbers. That's right, we're actually going to start your scales with simply just this finger, and I'll show you what I mean. Let's go over to the piano. So when I'm first learning scales, I like to poke out the pitches. The reason I do this is so I don't have to worry about different fingerings, crossing under, crossing over, and any other weird changes. I simply worry about what keys do I need in order to make sure I can play everything accurately. So I simply use my index finger, and I will just simply poke out every note of the C scale, which will be every note from this C all the way to this C. So here we go. Now you can do the same thing for your left hand as well. That way you don't have to worry about the mirror images that your fingers would normally make when you play with the proper fingering. You can also do this for any scale, not just C major, but you can do it for any of the minor scales as well. For example, C minor. Now, one reason I love poking out my scales at first, it allows me to easily see where my whole steps and my half steps are, so I'm playing the correct distances. For example, when I'm playing C minor, I know that I want to play a whole step, which is C to D, and then I want to play a half step after, which is D to E flat. If I don't do that, it won't sound minor. For example, if I just did this, those are both whole steps, which means I'm back in the major mode again. So poking out scales is a really easy way to make sure that you're hitting everything and identifying it before you have to really get the fingers going. So by poking out all of the notes, what you're able to do is see exactly where you need to go, hear every single pitch, and not have to worry about cross-unders, crossovers, and anything complex like that. So if you're brand new to practicing scales, that's honestly the best way to get started. I would not start any other way. So once you're comfortable poking out all the notes of your musical scale, then I would go back to the conventional fingering and start mastering that. So for this example, we're going to start with C major in our right hand, and we're going to use the finger pattern of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's how it works. So before I put my hands together, I like to make sure I know which fingering I'm using for each hand. So for example, the right hand is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, I understand my left hand is the mirror image, so this one will actually start with the pinky. It'll be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. And I make sure I master that on whatever scale I'm playing. Now, it can be the same thing for G major as well. For example, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I know my left hand is going to play the opposite fingering starting with 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. So now we're at the point in the video where we have to figure out how exactly are we going to put our hands together and play the scales like that. And that's the scary part for most beginner pianists. However, I'll show you a clever way that I put my hands together that doesn't involve any significant changes. And it's called the contrary motion scale, and here's how we're gonna do it. Now, when I'm first putting my hands together, just so I can feel and hear what that sounds like, I don't do parallel motion like this. Instead, what I focus on is contrary motion because the fingering will remain the same for both hands. For example, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I start on the same pitch to begin, so C major in this case, and I understand that all my twists and turns are all happening at the same time, and the finger numbers are also remaining the same for both hands. And look, this works for most contrary motion scales, not all. For example, if I were going to do B major, this would not work, right? 1. You can already see the fingers have changed. However, for the most part, all your shifts and turns are going to happen at the same time. And it works for a lot of scales, even in the minor mode. For example, A minor. Or another example, if we did G major. So the notes may not be the same, however, the timings, the changes, and the finger numbers are all the same. And it's a nice way just to get your hands playing together at the same time on the piano without the stress of having to put them in parallel motion, which we're going to talk about shortly. So I highly encourage you to start with the contrary motion scale because at least you can feel what it's like to hear pitches at the same time, even though the pitches are changing. The important part is that you feel your fingers making those changes and those shifts at the same time so that you're comfortable with what you're doing. So at this point, you have done a lot, right? You've poked out your scale pitches, you've learned each hand separately, and you've even put them together in contrary motion so you can line up your fingering. But now comes the more complex part, which is actually putting them together in parallel motion. That means the fingers will go up the piano together and down the piano together. But what you'll notice right away is that your fingering is going to be different for each hand, as well as when they actually change and do their crossovers and cross-unders. So I'll show you how to do this in C major first. So when you do parallel motion, one of the things you want to be careful with is understanding that your hands will not turn at the same time. They're going to turn at very different times. For example, at this point, my right hand has already changed to my thumb, but my left hand has yet to play its fifth finger. And then the left hand is now going to turn while my right hand is still going on its pattern. And on the way down, because the right hand turned first the first time, the left hand will have its cross under while this hand does its 5 fingers. Watch here. see that? And then the right hand gets to do its turn. So while I love the C major scale for its simplicity, it may not always be the easiest one to start with when you're putting your hands together. So I'm actually going to move you over to D flat major and explain why I like to start students on this scale sometimes. So while I love C major, the one reason I don't always teach students to start with it is because the turns are happening at different times, and I kind of want them to happen together. So one scale I suggest maybe starting with is D flat major. So watch how I turn. So while the fingering might be a little different for this scale, it is an easier one to start with, and although it's on the black keys, it's very easy to see where your pattern is and feel those changes. Usually with something like C major, you're weighting quite a few keys in this hand before you can actually do something. You have to understand that they have to be completely independent of each other before you really get involved with it. So as you can see, the beauty of the D flat major scale is that we're able to do our rotations and our turns and our cross unders generally at the same time. And by doing that, yes, the fingers are changing, but it takes some of the complexity out of it because you know your hands are supposed to be doing some sort of move at this time. Now, if you're still having a little bit of a struggle with putting your scales together, one thing you can do is change your articulations. So rather than playing them smooth and legato, you may benefit from playing them staccato, and here's how I would do that. Sometimes I find playing legato scales is a little complex, so what I'll do sometimes is just encourage pianists, especially in the beginning, to play the notes completely detached or staccato, because it just makes it easier to not have to feel that connection to the key. So for example, you might want to do this. Because for some people, that's a little easier than having to connect and moving the wrist with it and connecting like that. That just adds a little bit more difficulty to it. I find this step very helpful when I'm putting the hands together and going in parallel motion. Making those changes in the air rather than holding down and changing just seems to be a little easier way to get into it. And it's a way to vary and add some variety to your scale practice. So another thing I like to do with my scales is to break them in half. So for example, I might start with the first three notes like so. And when I pause, I've already shifted my thumb under, and then I do the next 5 notes. On the way down, same thing. Pause, shift over. The reason I suggest doing it this way sometimes is that it allows me to quickly move that thumb under and then also quickly put the other 4 fingers over. So I know exactly when my shifts are and I can play the notes in a quick succession. Once I've done that a few times, then I'll play the scale as normal to see if my hands have maintained the speed of the cross under and the crossover. So all the examples I've showed you so far have involved the major scale, and I did say I would talk about the minor scale. And there are several forms of minor, from harmonic minor to natural minor to melodic minor. There's just a lot of forms of it. I want to keep it simple and just say, hey, let's change finger number 3. Let's drop it by a half step, or we're just going to drop it by 1 key. So for example, if you normally played F sharp and D major, you might want to just go ahead and drop it down to F, and that way you have a simplified minor scale that you can play right away. So here's an example of how we can do that. Now, when you're trying to arrange your scales from major to minor, it's usually as simple as just changing 1 or 2 notes. In this example, I'll just show you some simple ways you can just drop finger 3 only and change the mood of your scale. So let's say I was C major here. Simply by changing the E and dropping it at a half step or going down 1 key, so from E to E flat, the whole smooth of the scale is going to change. If I wanted to make it sound even more minor, I could drop other keys. For example, I can drop the 6th key as well. So I can make it A become an A flat. If I want to drop it even more and make it a natural minor, I can go ahead and drop the B to a B flat. So those are all different modes of the minor scale. The harmonic minor, the natural minor, and even the melodic minor. It just depends how many keys you're dropping. Generally speaking, you want to make sure you drop the 3rd scale degree first, the 3rd note. By doing that, you kind of initiate your minor scale, no matter where you are. From there, note 6 and note 7 are additional notes you can drop to make them more minor. And whatever your core scale fingering is, whatever you're playing, whether it's D flat major, B flat major, whatever that is, that's going to remain the same. The notes are what changes. Or if I did D flat major and made it minor, fingering remained the same. So with that said, I would encourage you to definitely poke out your scale pitches first so you know what you're dealing with. For example, in D flat major, it's not going to be this. When I want to make it minor, it'll be this. Right? I drop my F down to an E, and then I apply the fingering numbers I know. Then I can go contrary motion, and then I can go and continue the whole scale through. This is just a very systematic way to approach your scales without the overwhelm of trying to just jump right into full 2-octave, multi-octave scales, all playing parallel motion and not really understanding where your twists and turns are. By doing it this way, you can at least see every step of the way, see where the structure is, know which notes you're trying to alter, pinpoint them literally, and then start getting your hands used to just touching the keys at the same time, hearing those pitches together, before you start trying to put them in the more complex versions of the scales. That's what I would encourage you to do, whether it's major or it's minor. So with all that said, I hope you found the video very helpful. Playing scales does not have to be complicated, and honestly, you should not be trying to play them hands together right away if you're just starting out. As you saw earlier, I really enjoy understanding the structure of the scale. That's why I like poking it out, figuring out exactly which notes I'm playing, when I'm playing them, identifying where my crossovers and cross-unders are. Then I love going in contrary motion so I can start getting my hands playing together early on. After that, then yes, I think it's a good idea to go ahead and play general, normal, parallel motion scales. And if you want to add some variety, you can always change your articulations, or you can add additional octaves to your scales to make them even more fun. By the way, if you do want to make playing your scales more fun, I have 4 awesome methods you should check out. Just click the link right there and you'll be able to check that video out. So I hope you enjoyed this short yet informative video on how to practice scales and how to truly master them if you're in the beginner stages of learning how to play the piano. Make sure to leave a like and comment and let me know how this is going for you. I'd be interested to hear how things are going. All right, with that said, I'll catch you guys next time.